Well, dear students, today we are going to start a new lecture that deals with right against exploitation. Two articles of our Constitution, 23 and 24, are important in this respect. These two articles basically deal with prohibition of forced labor, prohibition of child employment, and prohibition of human traffic. Put together, the major heading is rights against exploitation. Article 23 deals with prohibition of traffic in human beings and forced labor. According to this article, trafficking in human beings is prohibited. Similarly, forced labor is also prohibited. According to Article 23, number 1, traffic in human beings and begar and other similar forms of forced labor are prohibited. You see, what is begar? Begar means when you are taking work from someone else and you are not paying anything to him. So a labor or work done without remuneration is known as begar, which is prohibited in Article 23. So traffic in human beings and begar and other similar forms of forced labor are prohibited, and any contravention of this provision shall be an offence punishable in accordance with law. So two things are very clear in this article, that trafficking in human beings and begar are prohibited. But if someone will contravene this provision, then he shall be liable to be punished in accordance with the law made by the parliament. The second clause of Article 23 says that nothing in this article shall prevent the state from imposing compulsory services for public purposes. You see, there is a section 17 in Police Act 1861 under which the executive magistrates are authorized to employ the residents or civilians as special police force if the exigencies so require, that the present strength of police officers is not able to control the mob, not able to control the violence. Then in such circumstances, on the request of sub-inspector of police, the executive magistrate can employ residents or civilians of that area as special force. Now the person who is employed as a special police officer, he might say that I am being forced to work, and it amounts to forced labor. But it's not so. This is not a forced labor because the Constitution has authorized it, that for public purposes, state can impose compulsory services for public purposes. But there is a restriction on the state also, that while making employment for public purposes, the state shall not make any discrimination on grounds only of religion, race, caste, or class, or any of them. Again, here only word is important. If there are more than one grounds, then state can possibly discriminate. But while recruiting the civilians as special police officers, state will not make a discrimination on the ground only of religion, race, caste, or class, or any of them. So a person who is appointed by the district magistrate as special police officer cannot say that I am being forced to do this work. This is a force, this is a sanction given by law. Article 23, clause 2 is authorizing the district magistrate to employ residents of that area, civilians of that area as special police officer, because the exigencies so require. You see a leading case before you to illustrate the concept. State of Gujarat versus Honorable High Court of Gujarat. It was held in this case that prisoners serving rigorous imprisonment can be subjected to hard labor, but they are entitled to equitable wages, whereas other prisoners cannot be compelled to work. They may be allowed to work by prison authorities on their request. Dear students, may I tell you that there are two categories of prisoners. One category is that they are awarded rigorous imprisonment in accordance with law by the court of competent jurisdiction. So if a prisoner is awarded rigorous imprisonment, so during that period he can be subjected to hard labor. So the prisoner who is given hard labor inside the jail, he might say that this is a forced labor and it is prohibited according to constitution. But it is not so. It's not so. A person, a prisoner, a convicted person who is undergoing rigorous imprisonment, he can be asked to do hard labor. Hard labor means he may be employed to till the soil in the garden inside the jail. He may be employed in some construction work. He may be employed to do some cooking work in the jail, inside the jail itself, because he is undergoing rigorous imprisonment. Although, if you take hard labor from a prisoner, he is entitled to equitable wages. He gets a definite sum of money on daily basis for the work done. But other prisoners who are awarded simple imprisonment according to IPC by the competent court, so such prisoners who have been awarded simple imprisonment cannot be compelled to work. They may be allowed to work by prison authorities on their request. But according to law, jailer has no power to ask them to do hard work. Simple reason is that their punishment is simple. Had their punishment been rigorous imprisonment, then jailer was justified in taking hard labor work from those prisoners on payment of equitable wages. Then another very good case, Kedar versus Muthukoya. This case was decided by Kerala High Court. There was a law applicable in Kerala which made refusal to perform a personal service as agreed upon a penal offense. You see, A and B has made a contract of personal service, but this law says that if that person refuses to perform personal service, then it amounts to penal offense. Indirectly, you are saying that you will have to do work according to agreed conditions, and if you do not do it, then it is a penal offense. That means you are forcing that person by threat of being sent to jail that you will have to work, and that may be a forced labor. So Kerala High Court struck down such a law as being obnoxious to Article 23 as coming within category of forced labor. It amounts to great force that I am to work according to terms of the contract, and if I refuse to perform personal services according to the agreed conditions, then I will have to go to jail. That means this law is forcing me to do forced labor. So Kerala High Court declared such a law as being obnoxious to Article 23, which says that there will be prohibition of traffic in human beings and forced labor. Moving on, dear students, uh, the major heading of Article 23 and 24 is right against exploitation. So what is exploitation and what is begar? Exploitation here means misuse of services of others with the help of force. If I am misusing the services of a labor class With the help of force or threat, it amounts to exploitation. And begar, as I told you, means involuntary work without payment. I am taking work from a labor who is not willing to work. That too, I am not paying him any remuneration. It amounts to begar. And in India, the services of backward communities and weaker sections of the society were used without any payment. And this practice was known as practice of begar. Under Article 23, any form of exploitation is prohibited and no one shall be forced to provide labor or services against his will, even if remuneration is paid. You see, willingness is more important. The person who is doing labor work, he should be willing to do the work according to his wishes. So if you are paying remuneration, but he is not willing to work, it will amount to begar. And if you are paying remuneration which is less than minimum wages, then also it amounts to forced labor under Article 23. He is willing, he is working, labor is working, but you are not paying even minimum wages. So it amounts to forced labor. Thus, dear students, the system of bonded labor, that is debt bondage or services arising out of loan or debt or advance is known as bonded labor, which is unconstitutional. Suppose my father had taken a loan of 10,000 rupees from village headman and my father was doing daily labor work on his fields. After death of my father, I started doing the same labor work in the fields of the landowner who granted loan to my father. So my father as well as myself were working in the fields of that village headman like a bonded labor, which is now unconstitutional. Bonded labor is prohibited. Forced labor is prohibited. Similarly, forcing a helpless woman into prostitution is a crime. The intention of the constitution is that whatever a person does must be voluntarily. If a female is going for prostitution according to her own will, then it is not a crime. There must not be any element of coercion involved behind a woman or man's action. The moment there is an element of coercion, then it amounts to forced labor and is unconstitutional. Then comes traffic in human beings. What does it mean? Traffic in human beings means selling and buying men and women like goods for immoral and other purposes, and generally involves traffic of women and children. So, traffic in human beings and begar and other similar forms of forced labor are prohibited, and any contravention of this provision shall be an offense punishable in accordance with law is the spirit of Article 23. And dear students, if you compare this trafficking in human beings, which is prohibited in our constitution, if you compare this with uh, American law, then you will find that this provision of Article 23 is similar to the 13th Amendment of the American Constitution, which abolished slavery in USA. While our Constitution does not explicitly forbid slavery, but the scope of Article 23 has been made wider by using the term traffic in human beings and forced labor. So a careful reading of Article 23 shows that slavery is also prohibited in our country because the term traffic in human beings and forced labor includes the concept of slavery also. Thus, dear students, Constitution of India not only prohibits slavery but also any sort of traffic in women, children, or crippled for immoral purposes. So, slavery is prohibited. Any kind of trafficking in women is prohibited. Any kind of trafficking in children is prohibited. Any kind of sale or purchase of a crippled person for immoral purposes is prohibited. And dear students, you will see, if you see carefully the language of Article 23, this article bounds the state as well as private citizens both. Article 23 protects the individual not only against the state, but also against private citizens. It imposes a positive obligation on the state to take steps to abolish the evil of trafficking in human being and begar and other similar forms of forced labor wherever they are found. And dear students, if you have a look at Article 35A Clause 2, under which the Parliament is authorized to make laws for punishing acts prohibited by Article 23. Whatever is prohibited in Article 23, Article 35 authorizes the Parliament to make laws for punishing acts which are prohibited by Article 23. Now, there are few examples of laws which Parliament has enacted under Article 23, Clause 2. And one example is SITA. SITA is abbreviated name for the Suppression of Immoral Traffic in Women and Girls Act 1956. This act was passed for punishing acts which result in trafficking in human beings, trafficking especially in women and girls. The name of the act is SITA, which punishes if somebody is indulged in trafficking in women and children. Similarly, dear students, we have another legislation, Bonded Labor System Abolition Act of 1976. This act prohibits the system of bonded labor. So these are the illustrations of legislations which carry into effect the spirit of Article 23. And Article 23 Clause 2, however, permits the state to impose compulsory services for public services. Thus, conscription means compulsory enrollment of persons, especially for military purposes, is not unconstitutional. If there is a shortage of personnel in military services, then government can order for compulsory enrollment of persons for military purposes. And if somebody is compulsorily sent into military services, he might say that it is forced labor. You are sending me in army services by force, but it is not unconstitutional. Why? Because in compelling people to render national services is in the interest of the public. If you are being sent in the army, compulsorily, you are being sent to forces compulsorily by the government, then it is not unconstitutional. But when state is compelling people to render national services, the state must not discriminate on grounds only of religion, race, caste, or class, or any of them. Only word is again important. If there are more than one grounds, discrimination can be made. But discrimination while recruiting persons for military services, so at the time of recruitment, state must not discriminate only on the grounds of religion, race, caste, or class, or any of them. Then we have another article 24, which deals with prohibition of employment of children in factories, etc. Article 24 says that no child below the age of 14 years shall be employed to work in any factory, mine, or engaged in any other hazardous employment. You see, up to the age of 14 years, every child has a fundamental right to education, and it is a duty of the state to provide free and compulsory education to all children between age group of 6 to 14. So up to 14 years, the child is not meant to work in factories, mines, or other hazardous employment. He is supposed to go to the school. So on the one hand, there is a direction that state shall provide compulsory education to every child between age group of 6 to 14. And on the other hand, Article 24 says that such a child who is below 14 years of age, he shall not be employed in any factory, mine, or he shall not be engaged in any other hazardous employment because he has a fundamental right to education that he has to be sent to a school for education. So, dear students, this article absolutely prohibits employment of children in any factory, any hazardous industry, or mines. But it does not even allow any exception. There is no exception mentioned in Article 24. But implicitly, it allows the children to work in non-hazardous industries such as domestic work. Because domestic work is not an hazardous industry. So if somebody has employed, say, a boy or girl of 12 years age for cleaning purposes, for cooking purposes at home as a domestic servant, then perhaps this article does not come in vain because working as domestic hand is not hazardous in nature. Then we have Factories Act 1948. This is also enacted to carry out the spirit of Article 24. The Factory Act 1948 prohibits the employment of children by setting the limit of the completion of 14 years as a minimum age for working in any factory. This act defines a child as a person who has completed his 15th year of age. It defines an adolescent as one who has completed his 15th year of age but has not completed his 18th year of age. So between 15th and 18th, the child is counted as adolescent. And a young person is defined as either a child or adolescent. And in 1954, my dear students, the Factory Act was again amended to prohibit the employment of adolescents under the age of 17 years at night. During night hours, you cannot employ an adolescent under age of 17 years. Then we have Mines Act of 1952 also. This act prohibits the employment of children below 18 years of age in a mine. You cannot employ a child below 18 years in mine works. Then comes, dear students, another act, that is Child Labor Prohibition and Regulation Act of 1986. This act was passed to check the child labor. It outlines where and how children can work and where they cannot. So child labor is expressly prohibited by this act also. Then, dear students, we have Juvenile Justice, Care and Protection of Children Act of 2015. And this act made it a crime for anyone to procure or employ a child in any hazardous employment or in a bondage labor. If somebody is employing a child in a hazardous factory or in a bonded form of labor, then employer shall be punished under Juvenile Justice Care and Protection Act of 2015. Then we have a very good illustration before you, dear students. This case was decided by Manipur High Court. The name of the case is Kahausen Thankul versus Simri Shelley. In this case, there was a custom prevailing in Manipur that from each house in the village, one member will give 1 day free labor to the headman of the village. One member of each house in that village has to offer 1 day's free labor to the headman of the village. This custom was declared as violative of Article 23 of Constitution of India. Why? You are taking free labor, you are taking a forced labor from each house daily. One member of each house holder in that community is going to the residence of headman of the village and doing their free labor work. So this free labor and then compulsion that each and every house has to contribute daily one member who will work on the instructions of headman of the village. This was held to be violative of Article 23 because it amounts to forced labor. Then, dear students, we had a very famous case, Asiad workers case, when Asian Games were held in New Delhi. Lot many constructions of uh, stadiums, roads, buildings was undertaken, and lot many workers were employed in those construction works, but even minimum wages were not being paid to the construction workers. So this was challenged before the Supreme Court by this NGO, PUCL, People's Union for Civil Liberties versus Union of India is the name of the case, where the Supreme Court declared that taking work from workers and not paying them even minimum wages is in direct violation of Article 23 of our Constitution. Then another very famous illustration is in the shape of a case, that is Bandhuva Mukti Morcha versus Union of India, again decided by the Supreme Court. In this case, the Supreme Court declared bonded labor as a crude form of forced labor, which is prohibited by Article 23. See the language of the Supreme Court? That bonded labor is a crude form of forced labor, which is prohibited by Article 23. Then, dear students, this illustration indirectly I gave you earlier relating to Section 17 of Police Act 1861. The name of the leading case is Dulal Samanta versus D.M. Pavra. This case was decided by Calcutta High Court, and it was held that under Section 17 of Police Act 1861, where the district magistrate is authorized to appoint many residents of neighborhood as special police officers as he may require to act in order to control any situation of law and order. Such an appointment comes within the exception provided in Article 23 Clause 2 and was held to be legal. So under Article 23 Clause 2, state is authorized by law to make compulsory services for public purposes. If the services of ordinary citizens are required in public interest, then district magistrate is authorized to appoint the residents of that locality as special police officers, and this appointment was held to be legal. It is not a forced labor because you are being recruited as special police officer in accordance with law. It has the backing of law. It has the sanction of law. Hence, it is not illegal but it was held that such an appointment under Section 17 of the Police Act was legal. Then another important illustration, dear students, is Salal Hydro Project versus State of Jammu and Kashmir. This case was also decided by the Supreme Court way back in 1984, and it was held in this case that employment of children below 14 years of age in construction works violates Article 24 because construction work was treated as a hazardous kind of work. So, children below 14 years of age cannot be employed in construction works because it violates Article 24. Then the last illustration, dear students, before you is relating to matchbox industries in Shivakashi. You know, in Shivakashi, there are lot many matchbox industries. You know, matchbox is a small and very light item, and the sticks are also lighter in weight. So these industrialists think that small children can work very well in these matchbox industries. So when this working of young children in matchbox industries in Shivakashi was challenged before the Supreme Court as violative of Article 24, then Supreme Court issued detailed directions in the context of employment and exploitation of children in matchbox industries in Shivakashi, prohibiting employment of children below the age of 14 and making arrangements for their education by creating a fund and providing employment to parents. See the beauty of this judgment, my dear students. The Supreme Court not only prohibited that children below age of 14 cannot be employed in such industries. Why? At the same time, they said that children up to the age of 14 years, they have a fundamental right of education for going to the school. And our constitution also says that it is the duty of the state to provide free and compulsory education to all the children between age group 6 to 14. So you are sending those children to industries instead of schools. So Supreme Court directed that please make arrangements for their education and create a fund for that if necessary. And at the same time, Supreme Court said that you provide employment to parents, because an argument was raised before the Supreme Court that if these children are not allowed to work, they will starve. They will have no arrangement for meals twice a day. So Supreme Court said, no, it's not that. You give employment to the parents of the children and send the parents to the factories for work and send the children between 6 to 18 years of age group to the schools for education. So dear students, this is the main spirit of Article 23 and 24 of Constitution of India. To summarize it, Article 23 prohibits traffic in human beings and forced labor. It prohibits begar also, and at the same time, it makes it a punishable offense also if somebody is violating Article 23. Then 24, as we have seen, 24 prohibits employment of children in factories under the age of 14 years. They cannot be employed in any factory, mine, or any other hazardous employment. Okay.